So risk management. This is a high-level overview of risk management process. So you want to assess the risk, identify the risk, review controls, and control it. So again, there's risk in everything you do, but you want to make sure the risk is as minimum possible through your whole risk assessment process. So with risk assessment, you want to understand what is critical to your process. You want to use the validation master plan to identify what equipment will and will not be validated. There are three main categories: GMP criticals, direct product contact, such as your Wi-Fi system; GMP non-critical, indirect impact on product quality, such as your HVAC in general manufacturing areas; and non-GMP, no product impact, such as HVAC in office areas. So these are the top three categories, and with your risk and assessing the risk and figuring out what's critical, non-critical, non-GMP, you're able to classify as risks and take appropriate action based on what's critical versus non-critical or non-GMP. So risk assessment parameters for calculating risk, your probability, how often does it happen, detectability, will let you know when it does happen and how, and do we have controls in place, and then severity, what is the effect on product quality and patient safety. So when you're doing your risk assessment, calculating your risk, these are things you want to be thinking about: your probability, your detectability, and your severity. So risk assessment. So again, as you're doing your risks, the focus should always be on the product and the patient. So when you're assessing risks, that should be your focus, because if you're not focusing on the product and the patient, you could be downplaying or not assessing your risk properly. But when you consider the patient product, that's what you should be thinking about when assessing the risk. So during the risk assessment exercise, ask yourself the following: what can go wrong? What is the likelihood that this will go wrong? What are the consequences of when it does? Are there any built-in safety checks or processes? And can we detect it when it happens before it's too late? So these are all questions you want to ask yourself. Again, as you're doing your risk, assessing it, thinking about the patient, thinking about the product, and asking yourself these questions. So risk assessment exercise, key concepts. So GAMP5 describes a simple two-step process. So plot severity versus probability to assess your risk class, and plot risk class versus detectability to obtain risk priority. So again, as we stated earlier, we did an example assessing your risk using these risk assessment exercise, determining if the risk is high, medium, low, versus the probability and detectability helps you get an overview on what exactly you're looking at as far as the risk and how to mitigate or prevent it from it being a problem. Again, this is another high risk assessment matrix that people could use. There's plenty of them, but each firm has their own risk assessment matrix, which should be trained on, or it'll be proceduralized on what you should use when performing your risk. But there is a lot of different risk assessment matrices out there, just depending on what the company uses and how you use it to determine your risk for a particular process. Again, another risk evaluation tool. There's plenty of them. I'm not going to go into detail, but this is just a high-level overview. You can go through your slides and see which one you like or feel more comfortable with. So risk assessment. So only systems which have direct impact to product quality or have direct contact with product require validation. So classification of equipment is important. Ensure that compliance and quality units agree with classifications, and always document rationale for the risk assessment and have it reviewed by technical quality personnel at minimum. So again, these are things you need to think of when doing your risk assessment: who reviews it, who approves it, and then doing the classification and using these risk assessment matrices to help you get to your assessment. So the key to success is to evaluate your risk and document your rationale. Famous quote by Albert Einstein. So you need to always be evaluating your risk. Is always risk in everything you do. And if something is high risk or low risk, you need to be able to document your rationale how you got there. So it's very important. If a potential risk is brought up and you assess it, it needs to be documented on why you thought it was high, critical, or not critical at all. So knowledge check. I'm not going to answer it here, but it gives you something to think about. So if a defective filter is used in a filtration step during manufacturing, the severity would be low since testing is conducted prior to the next step, and the correction would be to refilter the material. So think about this, true or false, and it would definitely be one of your test questions. So getting started with the evaluation program. So we'll list the key components of evaluation program and how to implement a validation program at your facility. So you want to use the team approach to assemble a team comprised of representatives from QA, engineering, manufacturing, and then others depending on the company structure. You can include your lab, your R&D, regulatory affairs, clinical engineering, purchasing, planning, and validation. But at minimum, you need representatives from QA, engineering, and manufacturing, and you can add more depending on the company structure. So summary, recommended steps to get started with your validation. So you want to form a validation team. You want to plan the approach and define requirements. You want to identify and describe processes. You want to specify process parameters and desired output. You want to decide on verification and our validation. You want to create a site validation master plan if one does not exist. Again, that's the high level overview. You want to create validation plans for large complex studies. You want to select methods and tools for validation. You want to create your validation protocols. Then you perform your IQ, OQ, and document the results in the final report. You want to determine the continuous process controls, monitor and control the process, and revalidate and or requalify as appropriate. So out of everything I just discussed, this is a high-level summary on how to get started and how to do your validation. So protocol development, you want to identify processes, you want to identify materials and equipment to be used. You want to be objective and measurable criteria. You want to define your length and duration of your validation. You want to have shifts, operators, and equipment to use. So getting started, protocol development, these are all things you want to identify and have in place before you do your validation. So your protocol development, you want to have identification of utilities for the process equipment. You want to identify operators and qualifications. You want to complete description of your process. You'll need relevant specifications, acceptance criteria that relate to the product components and your manufacturing materials. And you'll need process parameters to be monitored and methods for controlling them. So again, as you're doing your protocol, these are some of the things you need to be thinking about and have in place so you can have a very good, robust protocol. So again, we're part of protocol development. You want to have product characteristics to be monitored and method for monitoring. You want to have a definition of what constitutes nonconformance, statistical methods for data collection and analysis, consideration of maintenance and repairs of manufacturing equipment, criteria for revalidation and qualification, and obtain pre and post execution approvals from the quality. And again, things you want to consider as you develop your protocol. For your IQ, OQ, PQ,